So, one of the things that I noticed that's the difference between victims and abusers is that victims feel like they have to answer questions, that they are obligated to respond to the abuser and give them like an accurate, correct response to this, whatever the question is that they're asking. But abusers, they do not feel that way. And it made me wonder why victims feel like they have to answer the abuser's questions. Some of it I think is that when you're in when you're in an abuse dynamic but you're the victim, you often have a template of what this relationship is and what are the things that you do in a relationship. And so the victim will try to do those things sort of regardless of how the abuser is treating them. So for example, oh, when you're in a relationship, you know, both people love each other. And when you love someone, you show up for them and everyone is making sacrifices for the other person. And of course, if this person that I love and care about asks me a question, I'm going to answer the question. Meanwhile, the abuser is working off of a very different, non collaborative, non cooperative paradigm. It's usually a status hierarchy, and the abuser has put themselves or is attempting to put themselves in a position above the victim and trying to put the victim in a position below them. And so they do these like status reinforcing behaviors that we would recognize as like a is disrespect. So the victim might tolerate the disrespect, thinking, oh, they've just had a bad day, not recognizing that the behavior often is for the purpose specifically of putting the victim in that one down position, reinforcing their lower status in the hierarchy, making sure they stay in their place. They don't step out of line. Um, it can be punitive. And I think one of the things that abusers do that sort of reinforce this hierarchy they want is they demand information from the victim, information that's not even necessarily theirs that they're entitled to. They demand information from the victim. They ask this victim questions. But when the victim is asking the abuser questions, the abuser is not answering the questions. And they might come up with reasons in the moment, but the overarching pattern is that they do not feel that they have to answer the victim's questions. This, from the abuser's perspective, is not an equal relationship. And so they're being driven by this internal entitlement, unreasonable entitlement, but they're being driven by this internal entitlement that's driving the ways they think and therefore their behavior toward the victim. And so, if you're in the victim, you're like, oh, well, this person I love asked me this question. And so they answer it. I think also potentially there is, unless you're specifically raised with the idea of privacy, that not everything about you is everyone else's business, you may not necessarily recognize that there's information that is not for everybody. Not everyone needs to know stuff about you. I know that there are different cultures that have been historically oppressed, and so they're very particular about, you know, you don't tell everybody your business, basically. And so if you've been raised in a particular way to think that, I'm required to answer questions, or oh, you answer questions, and you don't have that internal like gate that goes, hey, now some of this is private for us. Some of this is, okay to tell another person. But also, just because someone asks a question doesn't mean they're entitled to an answer. This threat of entitlement that we're not recognizing in these relationship dynamics, you know, when we're talking about society, we can look at society and see, oh, this group of people, they feel entitled in society to sort of do whatever they want to. There's a level of self-superiority there. And depending on where you fall, your perception of who that group is going to be different. But I believe it is also true for interpersonal relationships. And so I'm sometimes a victim is sitting there and goes, oh, okay, this person wants information from me. How do I not look like I'm not responding? Because that's going to end up being a problem. Because this person is putting themselves in a position to punish me. How can I respond to them without giving them the information they want? And that brings me to interviews of young women in the media. So I don't know. I've never. I used to see people talk about Kim Kardashian all the time, how much they hated her, or think she's stupid, or like, representational of everything that's wrong with America or society or something like that. And I don't know about all that. What I know is that when I would see this woman give interviews, I was like, this is some master level deflection. The answer she's giving, this is like Miss America pageant level. I've been asked a tricky question and I'm threading the needle on how to answer this question in a way that makes it feel like I've answered the question without actually giving up the information this person wants and also seeming graceful while I'm doing it. In the 70s, Dolly Parton ended up doing this quite a bit. Was it with Barbara Walters? Barbara Walters. She's done this to a lot of young women. I'm thinking also of like interviews with like Britney Spears. Who else? When Britney Spears was younger, people would come and say all sorts of heinous stuff to her. And she always answered in these really gracious ways. And I think it doesn't look like intelligence to people because they don't recognize how freaking difficult it is. As somebody who is ADHD, autism. I have often said the things I shouldn't be saying in ways I shouldn't be saying them. So sometimes I think about, I'm watching an interview and I'm like, oh no, how would I answer that question? And then it's like, I don't think I'd answer this question correctly. I guess they call it media training, but there's a level of intelligence it takes to answer a question in a way that doesn't seem like you're not answering it. And the reason why anyone is in this position is because they are in a one down position where they don't feel like they're able to say no. I'm not answering this question. I'm not in a position of power to just rebuke or to just absolutely not give this person the time of day about this question I don't want to answer, which is really interesting. So this sort of this level of unreasonable entitlement that the abusers have toward the victim that leads them to treat them as if they are in a lower status position. That's what a lot of these behaviors are, by the way, that the abuser engages in. They're status reinforcing behaviors. They are dominance behaviors designed to get the victim to comply or to submit, thereby either establishing or reinforcing a hierarchy where the abuser is above the victim. And therefore, the abuser is in a position to punish the victim, have expectations of the victim, coerce the victim into doing things, and then eventually exert force against the victim. So when you are on the other end of this and you're just thinking, oh, we're in a family and we love each other. This is my best friend. In my friend group, we have fun and we all care about each other. This is my partner. Anyone who comes to you and acts like you aren't a grown-ass person who can make decisions and should be making decisions for yourself is someone to be very extremely wary of. And people will justify it to themselves like, oh, this is right. If you don't do this, you're wrong. Okay. We're allowed to be wrong. One, and two, most of the time victims aren't wrong anyway. But the reason why I've said this over and over, I believe in a victim's right to be wrong. I believe in their right to make mistakes, not because I think victims are wrong or because I think they've made mistakes, but because they've subconsciously come into agreement with the abuser that they are below the abuser and that they owe the abuser an explanation or answers to their questions, their submission. And therefore, if they don't do those things, that they are like wrong and should receive some kind of consequence. It's really a punishment. we don't recognize it's happening. And so like the little disses, the disrespect that the abusers and the people around the abuser that are reinforcing this coercive system of control, they're reinforcing the abuser's attempts to power over the victim. They're reinforcing the abuser's status above the victim. And we don't see it in these ways because of the language we use around relationships. Because ideally in relationships, it's not coming from this status perspective. It's we're all participating. It's collaborative. It's cooperative. We're working together as a family, or we're having fun together as a group. We are partners. Therefore, we're equally together in this relationship. Anyway, so when a victim is in a situation and this other person is engaging in small behaviors of disrespect that are plausibly deniable, that's that foundation they're laying. That status hierarchy where you are below them and you can't say anything about what they're doing. Or you might think, oh, it's not that big a deal. I should let it go. And then they escalate. Once they get that little foothold of being able to disrespect you. And the victim may not recognize it as a sign or, a disrespect. They may think, oh, this person's just having a really hard day. They had a rough childhood. I should be more patient. I should be more kind. Love is patient and love is kind. And not recognizing, oh, this other person isn't patient and isn't kind. And therefore is not, they don't appear to be loving me. They may not love me. So they use the victim's moral framework to establish themselves above the victim. That the victim has to be kind to the abuser, but the abuser doesn't have to be kind to you. They're in a position above the victim and they can do whatever they want to. And in fact, they feel completely, fully, unreasonably entitled to transgress against the victim and then turn around and tell the victim that it is their fault. DARVO, deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender, that we got from Jennifer Freyd. DARVO is a sign that there is a status hierarchy operating that you are not at the top of. You may think you're in a collaborative co-equal relationship. But if somebody is deny, attack, reversing victim and offender and flipping it back around on you, oh, now it's your fault for maybe asking them why they were stealing money from you or something. How could you ask that of me? They're going to act like your questions are wrong questions. Your questions are offensive in some way. Your questions aren't like genuine inquiries for additional information and clarification. And they don't have to answer your questions, but you have to answer theirs. Otherwise, you're a bad person. Anyway, I hope this makes sense, and I will talk to you later.